Hello, welcome back to the Jewish-Anglican. It's been a while. In today's episode, we're going to be tackling the discussion and issue and explanation of a certain economic philosophy that has been cropping up in the comments, and I've done a couple community posts recently about it. And that is the philosophy of corporatism and what my thoughts of it are. In the modern era, since the Industrial Revolution, there have been a war between the ideals of capitalism and the ideas of communism. Well, technically socialism and Marxism, but you get the point. Capitalism was founded by Adam Smith in Scotland, UK, in around 1776, right during the American Revolution, in his book called Wealth of Nations. That's where most of capitalism comes from. While Das Kapital, written by Karl Marx, was written in Germany by Karl Marx in the year of 1867. To quote History Unhinged, he went to his era's version of Arizona State and leached off of his friends and was a couch drifter. The majority of my audiences live in capitalist nations. I've done analytics. Let me break down the socialist philosophy for you. Communism or Marxism or socialism or whatever you want to call it is the belief that the means of production should be owned by the workers. And the managers should be kicked out and overthrown because they believe in a class conflict. And the workers will become the owners. And the workers also become the government, trying to create a classless, anti-elitist, anti-hierarchy society. It is also about redistributing and spreading the wealth of the people to the people, trying to make things equal amongst people. As you notice, this is anti-two things, and about being success. You could also make the argument that the French Revolution was a socialist revolution. I've heard that claim before. I need to do more research about it. Don't know enough. And Karl Marx actually makes a really good point about the Jewish people, is that even if they're not religious, inherently cannot accept socialism. They're just naturally incapable of it. And the fact that I've never been a socialist proves his point. We don't talk about Bernie. Another flaw in Marx's ideology is that the idea of creating a classist society by overthrowing the upper class and making the workers class-elected positions creates a new elitist within the nation. You can't get rid of hierarchy. It is a part of life. There is a natural aristocracy to humanity. By eradicating a hierarchy, you make a new one. I don't have as many qualms with capitalism as much I do have with Marx's philosophy. My problem with the philosophy of capitalism is only a few. First, the idea of the pursuit of wealth. The pursuit of wealth from a Christian point of view is technically a sin, with a rather large asterisk to it. Taking the pursuit of wealth to provide for your family or your community is not a sin. But greedily taking it yourself and just pursuing it for the pursuit of wealth is just pursuing it for the pursuit of it. I feel like that's something we need to combat in society, and that is a flaw of capitalism, is that it does somewhat make a overly consumer society. Before I get into my second problem, I want to clarify something. I've always been a capitalist, like I mentioned earlier, never been a socialist. And I argue I still somewhat am a capitalist. At least I do believe that the state shouldn't control how people buy things and what people want to buy. Should there be regulations? Of course. But what changed my opinion about capitalism? Because I used to be a very libertarian, not quite anarcho-capitalist, but very laissez-faire capitalist. I soon realized it just does not work. The idea of and this is part of my second idea, the idea of an invisible hand pulling the market that influences people doesn't 100% work. I do think to some degree, you still think there needs to be some governmental regulations with capitalism. If you have a purely capitalistic, anarcho-capitalist society, it will ultimately have some form of human trafficking or slavery or sex slavery within that. It comes with the same problem that communism has. If you have a pure communist nation, it's not going to work. People aren't good. You will have people trying to do heinous acts just for money instead of peace or whatever the communist idea is. Some form of regulation, not even against the heinous stuff, some form of it to just balance out things. Okay, what about you just outlaw slavery, sex trafficking, that type of stuff? Then it's fine, right? Not quite. Let's talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has recently been fighting against poisonous foods that has been, well, poisoning us. PepsiCo has officially announced they're taking out unnecessary ingredients and dyes. Now, Europe has already been doing this for years, and Pepsi just had these ingredients, but because the American people didn't know, they were poisoning us for decades. How is this fair? How is this a part of a fair capitalistic nation? There should be some governmental regulations so we don't poison ourselves. But I still think but of course, people should be able to open any business they want if they can meet these regulations. Yeah. And after diving into more other politicians who might be capitalistic, but more of a regulated form of capitalism, I've realized, is a regulated capitalist society enough? And the answer is, maybe not. Or at least not entirely. This brings to the ideology I want to speak of today. And that is corporatism. First, we have to clarify what corporatism isn't. It's not the idea where the big businesses become so monopolized and so powerful that people have barely a say over the government and they control all the interest groups and all the politicians. That, what I described, is not corporatism. That's corporatocracy. Big difference. Corporatism is one of its big ideas that I'm a big fan of, is class collaboration. Class collaboration is an interesting idea because while socialists use class struggle in making a classless society, the corporatist ideals believe in a society which needs collaboration between the classes to function. There is a class struggle, don't get me wrong. I have a neighbor who comes from South Africa, and they've said there is racism in America, but not based off skin color, but rather based off class. So I don't deny a class conflict, but overthrowing the upper class won't make it better. We need collaboration between the classes so society can function. Let me explain even further. The manager cannot work in the factory alone, nor the workers can all run the business. There needs to be the manager who runs and is the face and is the voice and is the leader, the torch, and the working man who works and works. He is the wrench. This is similar to actually a lot of apostolic churches, specifically around the clergy and the parishioners, about how, like, in terms of dignity, they are equal, but they have different roles that are required. The reason I mention this is because it is a historical resurgence from Catholic ideals. It has specifically from Pope Leo XIII, so yeah. A lot of corporatism can be found rerum novarum, which is also where distributism comes from, although I would consider them cousin philosophies, if that makes sense. One idea of corporatism is also the idea of government mediation, and government and businesses having a say in the government. But let me explain that. But first, let me explain the first half. The government playing a mediation role in the businesses. Now, I do think a private third party, either independent or hired by the business or the government, could also work. I also think even groups that want a corporatist society should do this. So to kind of show people have some type of legal counselor be a mediator between the workers and the managers, just as an example of corporatism in action. But let's go back to the mediating role, because that's where the fun begins. Imagine, if you will, the workers are working these coal mines that are just awful and it's long, they don't get good food, and they're sick of it. They want better working conditions. Instead of 18-hour workdays, they want 8-hour workdays. The coal mines are just too much for that many hours. The business says, no, that's absurd. Just shut up and get to work. Well, the coal mines, which causes the worsening of the worker. Oh, what did the workers do? But they go on strike. But the bad side of going on strike is that they're going to harm the innocent families that need the coal for fire and for food. The nation might starve to death because of this, or at least half of it. So the government comes in, with some type of mediator between the workers and the managerial roles, and they come up with a deal where no one gets screwed over, or at least there is no crookedness in the deal. If this sounds too implausible, it isn't. If you think this is a European-only thing, it isn't. Because the 27th President of the United States of America did this. And his name was Theodore Roosevelt, and he was fucked.
Working men should be treated as partners by the large corporations. And they should come together. Socialist! They should come together to make this country a good place to live.
On October 3rd, 1902, Theodore Roosevelt had to deal with the coal strike. Theodore Roosevelt made sure neither came out further than the other. He made it a square deal. Not everyone is necessarily fair. Sometimes some pleas are going to be impossible to do. But square deal, which is very corporatist in nature when you think about it, because it is about mediating between, it is using the government as a mediator between the workers and the managers. Now what's interesting is capitalists and socialists often accuse corporatism of being the opposition. Capitalists argue it's communism in disguise, and socialists argue it's capitalism in disguise. Just how some accuse Theodore Roosevelt of being that, of being each other. So far, in my opinions, I think good old Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy, or TD as his family called him, was a corporatist. At least a proto-corporatist. I find it weird that capitalists argue corporatism is communism in disguise, because parts of it, especially the business, influence, and government, can be flavored and painted as legalized lobbying. I'm not saying it is, just it can be flavored and painted that way, easily. Now, at first, I don't think it's as... Now, at first, I did understand where capitalists came from. The idea of class collaboration might sound a little socialist if you just don't know much. But the thing is, we do know much. If you dig into socialism, it's not socialist at all. Or even the government being a mediator, or so much government influence on a big business. But once again, the socialists favor the workers. Corporatism wants to make a square deal. There's going to be a lot of Theodore Roosevelt comparisons, so be prepared for that. But with the square deal, why haven't corporatists argued this to conservatives? Conservatives love Theodore Roosevelt. Why has no one tried to argue this? Using Theodore Roosevelt as the best example, better than FDR, since FDR has grown more controversial. And the thing with socialist thinking and capitalist in disguise isn't that far off, at least some forms of corporatism. I would call it a regulated form of capitalism. At least neo-corporatism and Catholic corporatism is a regulated form of capitalism. If the biggest criticism of capitalism is the idea of managers doing anything they want, wish and employees getting stopped, then corporatism is the best ideology to combat this. For the conservatives and liberals, doesn't this sound like a nice compromise? You don't have the managers doing whatever they want. You don't have the workers being too powerful. Everybody can fight for a say. Everybody has a square deal. Has a say in the industry's body. Without the body, society can't function. Now, I have mentioned earlier is the business in the government. The idea of the business in government sounds very concerning and worrying for everyone. But hear me out. Both capitalists and socialists. Imagine there being a separate legislating body of business. But you don't have a business straight on, like McDonald's, for example. You would have a type of industry. The preferable term would be guilds. You would have 7 seats for the military guild, 12 seats for the farmer guild, 5 seats from the mechanics guild, and so on and so on. Corporatism's history does stem from the old guild system of Europe. Guilds were not necessarily replaced by unions, but unions kind of took on the mainstream. These guilds on the national legislation, or the National Guild Hall, as I'd like to call it, would be consisting of major industries. So, for example, you'd have the fast food guild, and they would come together to decide who they should vote for to be a representative, or merchant, as I like to call them. How that would work would depend on the guild. Maybe in one guild, it's only the managers that vote. In another guild, it's the managers and the workers. It depends on what guild you want to work with. But wait, shouldn't the people get a vote, you ask? Maybe. I imagine people voting on like a ranked choice-based system where they vote in a guild that they would like to see, not the person, but the guild itself. Like, take it like this. On a scale of 1 to 10, you would vote on what guild is important. Let's say it was me voting. I'd say farmers 10, factories 8, auto mechanics 8, delivering 6, airlines 9, etc., etc. This is just an idea. I would argue there should be an exception for the Farmers Guild since they are the most important for a functioning society, but that's a whole other debate. Also, this subcategory of corporatism, because there's a lot of different forms of corporatism, I think would be called guild corporatism because it focuses more on the guilds. This begs another question. Is corporatism compatible with capitalism or socialism? It really depends on the system. With capitalism, yes, especially Catholic and liberal corporatism, and even neo-corporatism, you could consider as capitalistic adjacent or regulated capitalism. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with that. With socialism, we'll get to that later. More detail on the history of corporatism and the differences, I'd recommend Law Vader's corporatism video. It is such a massive help. I love him. He's great. Keep praying for him. God bless. Since I got the majority of the issues out of the way, let's get into some other topics. More random stuff, abstract stuff, let's say. And we'll get to you later, sir. This is what I think the corporatist flag should be. The torch represents the leadership and role that leadership plays within corporatism. The wrench represents the working man. I did think of a hammer at first, but that's too socialist. And plus, the wrench really gives off the vibe of a working man. The cog, or gear, or whatever, represents the unity and alliance and necessity between them, and for society to function. The gold represents the religious Christian history behind it, because that is something that people ignore. When talking about religious economic ideologies, most people talk about distributism, but corporatism is also there. So this is my preferable flag. Any other ideas for a corporatist flag or symbol? Come up with your own. Now, I do know there's another symbol that is popular for corporatism I see a bit, which is a bundle of sticks with a money sign. The reason I'm not a fan of this is because of two reasons. First, the money sign is an American thing. Corporatism isn't an American thing. It can be, like Theodore Roosevelt, but The second issue is the bundle of sticks. That's technically a fascist symbol, or it became a fascist symbol. Now, I do know America has it in the Senate because it was a Roman thing originally. But in my opinion, corporatism has already been accused of being labeled with fascism because of fascist Italy, which we'll get to in a minute. But so it's not even that known of a symbol for corporatism, so let's just distance ourselves from that. Now, I've already mentioned liberal corporatism, Catholic corporatism, and neo-corporatism, which is mostly found in Northern Europe and Ireland and Singapore. But we do have to address the rather bald elephant in the room, known as Benito Mussolini. Mussolini did have a form of corporatism called fascist corporatism. It is a version that is often leaning more towards socialism than to capitalism. I'm sure you can find other forms of corporatism that lean more to socialist. If you do, leave that in the comment, because I think fascism is the only one that I personally am familiar with that leans more towards the socialist side. My opinion, neo-corporatism is closer to Catholic corporatism and is closer to a more regulated version of capitalistic society, just regulated. While fascist corporatism is less of an anti-manager form of socialism, which is better, I guess. My form of guild corporatism is more capitalistic friendly, or at least more free market. Corporatism would land on the political compass map. I actually made my own here because I thought this is a better representation of it, and plus I want to see what you guys think of it. Honestly, I think it'd probably be in the center, off center somewhere. Let me also show you the polls of all the corporatist things I've done over the weekend since I've been in the South. I'm not going to do the Anglosphere because that's going to be a later video. My other poll I did was, would you consider Theodore Roosevelt as a corporatist-like figure and politician? 40% said yes, 40% said no, and 20% said other in the comments but did not leave anything in the comments. Now, at American Republic said, maybe, but I think his cousin FDR is closer to corporatism, which would be based, but FDR was a liberal internationalist, so he's in a hell, probably. Which is fair, he probably is, but that's not us to speculate, that's up to God. And I agree, but I do think he did start to lean more towards the socialist side of things. After the Roosevelt, I did, well, this is all as of recording, so this might be different editing. Do you think corporatism and capitalism are compatible? Please explain your answer in the comments. 16 people voted in this. 38% said yes. 31% said no. And depends on the system was done by 31%. At Gabriel Reed LL9XQ, he asked what my definition of corporatism is. And I already explained along with class collab. Also, another shout out to American Republic. He says, depends. Catholic corporatism, yes. Fascist corporatism, probably not. Which I agree. After that, I did another community post. And I think this might be this might have the most votes out of any of them. It is, what is your preferable economic philosophy? And there was capitalism, communism, and corporatism. 65% for the capitalism. Fair enough. Capitalism is pretty great when it's regulated. 6% for the communists. No idea who that is. I don't know who in my audience is a commie. Please list down below if you're a commie or not. And corporatism at 29%. There's a lot of questions about social capitalism and distributism, which a lot of them can be conflated with forms of corporatism. The next poll I did had 23 votes. Which nation would most likely return to monarchism? Germany or France? 23 votes. Germany had 26% of it, and the French had 74%. Another shout out to at American Republic, 1783. Sorry, I forgot the number earlier. Said Germany is just guilt-ridden of embracing anything openly right-wing, which he's not wrong, unfortunately. So, but the Kaiser Wilhelm was pretty cool in my opinion. I also wrote something about corporatist aesthetic. If you have any other ideas about corporatist aesthetic, list it below. And at also, Wilhelmus van Diper, yes, was generous enough to shout me out. He's a great channel. He makes a lot of out-of-context videos on Redeem Zoomer, and I think he's going to do a Jordan B. Cooper one, so check that out when that releases. But also shout out to at Otto Last Night. I actually commented on a Law Vader video when I was writing the script saying, what a coincidence, I was just writing a script for corporatism when Law Vader dropped. And he says, me too. So shout out to him. He's going to drop one soon, so be on the lookout. I'll definitely comment on him. I'm already subscribed. Don't worry, we only got 2 more polls left. Should Hawaii reinstate the monarch? 21 votes. 67% were in favor, 33% were against it. I believe it should, but it should remain in the United States, if that makes sense. Kind of like a native reservation kind of thing. And finally, the last poll before the Anglosphere polls, because that'll be in a later video. Since communism was kicked out, now you have to choose between capitalism and corporatism and explain why in the comments. Now, not as many people voted in. I'm not sure why. But at 42%, capitalism was approved. And at 58%, corporatism was voted. At John Morrison 2021, he's definitely one of my most earliest commenters. Shout out to him. It depends on the situation. For the US, it's better to adapt some corporatism, but make sure it's not socialist country by doing that. Wise words. Finally, another important shout out is at American Republic 1783. Adopt Christian corporatism and decentralized guild system based on profession and class collaboration, but it works within a market system. Arguably, that's a great idea. Hey, this is Editing Jewish-Anglican here. I just want to let you know a corporatist website is now up. Go to unitedcorporatisteofamerica.com. It's a good website if you just want to send to people to get a good explanation. It's just a good website. Go. And to those who are confused as why it is called corporatism, let me give you the explanation. Because it comes from the Latin word corpus, which just means body. Because the Bible actually says in one of Paul's letters to the Corinthians, "For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body through many are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot were to say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, they would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear were to say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not mean it any less part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those members of the body, that we think less honorable, we clothe with great honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect, whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, given the greatest honor to the inferior member, that there may no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then deeds of power, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, do all work miracles, do all possess gifts of healing, do all speak in tongues, do all interpret, but strive for the greater gift, and I will show you still more excellent way. It doesn't matter if you're not a Christian. Corporatism is for anyone that wants to practice. But I just thought this was important to share in the final moment because corporatism is a Christian philosophy, or at least been heavily interpreted by such. Maybe corporatism inspires you to be a Christian. I don't know. But I pray that every single one of you have a very blessed day. Amen.